I wanted to also just reiterate go back over some comments people made in their introductions. This is definitely about action. We're laying this ground for our working groups, which all are about action. And I really want to keep emphasizing that as we make our comments and go through these panel sessions, that we've been to so many events where we all talk with each other and then we go away and we're not quite sure what happened. So one of the things that we really wanted to focus on is the Women's Climate Action Agenda, which is what all of this work is towards, so that we can really take the time to craft and draft a really important document that we can walk out of here with, that we know is something we want to implement. So I just want to keep stressing that as we're working together, that this is all leading towards these working groups for action. I want to tie in a little bit to last night, something that came up in the conversation with Vonda Nishiva and Jane Goodall. One of the things that has really guided us in this work with the International Women's Earth and Climate Initiative is our guiding principles. And we feel very strongly about having a rights-based approach to the work. And right now, we really need legal bite in what we're doing, speaking of action. And our 4 guiding principles are the rights of women, the rights of Indigenous people, the rights of nature, and the rights of future generations. And I want to offer that to all of you because we really think those are the voices that have been silenced and missing from the conversation. And when we're talking about balance and the wings being balanced, I think this is where we need to look, is what we have been overlooking. And so I want to really have that be something we think about as we work towards building the working groups and the Women's Climate Action Agenda. I think that we're in this crisis not because we can't find solutions. We're in the crisis because we're not implementing solutions that are already here. We have solar and wind and geothermal technologies, eco-cities, agroecology, which was mentioned last night, permaculture. We have new economic structures and indicators that our economic panel is going to discuss. And I think this is precisely, exactly where women can make the difference, in the fact that we have these solutions. Several of you have been asking me, so I'm just going to make a quick comment about this, about where this idea came from for this summit. In brief, I had a vision several years ago while walking in the ancient redwood trees in California, which is where I'm from, and grew up with the beautiful Pacific Ocean and the redwoods there. And I began to really think about bringing women from all over the world together, from many sectors, to counsel together at this urgent time. And I just had this crystalline moment where every ounce of my being knew that we could not continue, and we cannot continue, doing business as usual. And I'd been in a lot of UN conferences and different grassroots organizations, and just seeing this immense knowledge and power that women hold, and how we need to come together at this time. But the vision came about because of all of you in this room and the remarkable work you're doing already. And so the idea is, how do we network and collaborate at a much higher level? And the fact is, women are key to solutions. And I'm going to say some of the statistics that we know, and some maybe that we don't know. But again, this morning we wanted to lay a foundation of where we stand. And this next part is really about sharing with you exactly where women have power together. Right now, women are responsible for half of the world's food production, and women standing together are envisioning a world where women, especially those growing our food, no longer own less than 1% of the land and wealth. I think when women farmers are empowered, we are going to see food security. It is women who are responsible for food production and the collection of water and fuel wood, which makes them particularly aware of changing weather patterns that alter growing seasons, decrease crop yields, and lower water levels. This knowledge is essential when we're talking about adaptation and mitigation strategies. The women know what's going on. Women in North America determine 80% of all consumer purchases. Imagine how that market power could be mobilized to reduce carbon emissions through purchasing choices, and including demanding an end to fossil fuels. And let's bring that into our working groups. Really, how can we harness that power that women have, 80% in the global north? Imagine women demanding a change to endless economic growth models. and current consumption patterns that are destroying our Earth. That's something we can also teach our children about, how we can change our understanding of consumption. Studies show that whether we look to the developed world or developing countries, when you empower women through jobs and education, some really important things happen. Populations stabilize. We need that. Education improves, and health improves. Economies improve. All of these are foundational to sustainability solutions. When women comprise 30% of the leadership, companies do business better and nations govern better. I'd like that to be 50%, but I'll take 30% right now, but the aim is 50%. Women's decision-making has important implications for climate change. A study of 130 countries found that countries with higher female parliamentary representation are more prone to ratify international environmental treaties. And as a lot of you in this room know, at the UN climate negotiations, women currently are outnumbered by their male counterparts 3-1. But after a lot of hardworking efforts by many women in this room, at last year's conference in Doha, a breakthrough agreement to promote gender balance in the negotiations was adopted. And this is really an important step, but as we know, so much more needs to happen, and a lot of women in this room are gearing up for the next UN climate negotiations to take this further. And studies in the developed world show that women take climate change more seriously and understand it as a danger in higher numbers than men, and therefore they are more likely to take action to do something about it. And I'd like us to take great advantage of this and get a lot more women engaged and rolling up their sleeves. I could go on, but the point is there's an enormous opportunity to engage women worldwide in solutions and actions on climate change. And I'd love to see us draw upon that and really reach out to our sisters all over the world who are not engaged in environmental movements and explain this to them, educate them, and find different ways that we can really expand our movement together. The other thing is we're also asking about a new narrative, and we think women are well poised for a deeper conversation about our inner life and our values. As women, we have something to add to the climate dialogue that is important to not shy away from, and that's our emotional and spiritual intelligence. I remember several years ago, Joanna Macy, who some of you probably know, a wonderful elder of ours, and she told me the story about early on in her career being confronted by several leaders who said, you know, women get too emotional about environmental issues, and that interferes with their work. And I really loved her response. She said, you know, if we can't get emotional about destroying our planet, what are we supposed to get emotional about? So I think this is something we really need to also bring into a lot of these formal spaces and understand that we need to break that up. I had a very powerful experience earlier this year. The Women's Earth and Climate Caucus hosted a delegation of women activists who participated in the largest climate rally in the United States. I'm sure some of you here were there as well. And we were protesting the Keystone XL pipeline. Our campaign is called Women of the Land Speak, and the delegation was comprised of First Nations women from Canada who are living on the front lines of the tar sands and farmers and ranchers living along the pipeline in the US. We held several events after the rally, including one with the Environmental Protection Agency, to express the concerns of the women. And in addition to the powerful presentations these women delivered about the science, the legal issues, and the devastation of their people and the land due to the tar sands and its infrastructure, the thing that really stood out the most to me during one of the question and answer periods is a young woman who stood up and asked about how these impacted women were dealing with their grief. The entire room went completely silent as the First Nation women expressed how they actually had no time to grieve because they had to fight for their communities and land, and that stopping to grieve would mean more time was taken away from the fight at their hands and the protection of their communities. And also how hard this is for them because of the loss of loved ones due to increasing high cancer rates and the massive destruction of their lands and way of life. As they spoke, tears rolled down their faces because it's really hard to talk about grief without feeling grief. And at that point, the entire room began to grieve with them. And actually, Casey Camp was there and offered a beautiful prayer to the room at that point. I mention this because afterwards, I've never had so many people come up to me and say that this conversation made them get even more dedicated to their causes, more committed to action. And so I want to invite in the fact that grief and our emotions and our spiritual perspectives, opening our hearts, is also part of the solution and part of something that I think women have a great deal of strength in. And we have this special relationship that we need to really find a way to share in a lot of the formal meetings we're doing, and also when we're conveying these subjects, and not shy away from our emotional and spiritual intelligence. Women also have a very special relationship with nature, with the earth, with Mother Earth. It's not better than men's, but it's very specific, and I think it's been silenced, and we need to bring forward more and more this understanding of Pachamama and how women relate to the earth in a deep way that also will be very, very healing for our conversations as we go forward. So the last part I want to bring up is about the Women's Climate Action Agenda, and Claire Greensfelder and Marta Benavides are going to be co-facilitating this, and they're really incredible facilitators and have worked in this field for a long time. And our goal is to have this Women's Climate Action Agenda be something that brings forward a lot of impact, and we're looking at two different channels with it. And I want to present this now so you're thinking about it as we go into the panel conversations. Two different streams, two different channels. One aspect is we really want to look at policy solutions, because we know we need to have very strong policies put into place. What are the most important policies that we need to address right now for the most direct action to really confront the crisis straight on? We also want to look at on-the-ground solutions. A lot of you are practitioners. We want to look at what are the best on-the-ground solutions in your issue areas. So these are the two streams that we're looking at, and in each issue area in the 8 working groups to really go into both policy as well as on-the-ground solutions. And as you're hearing this conversation, let's bring forth both these aspects of the solutions for the climate action agenda. All right, so I'm going to move on and invite up Sally Ranney to complete this section on women standing tall. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm going to use my computer for notes today because my printer died on me this morning about 5 minutes before leaving. But what I want to share with you, and maybe many of you might know this or not know this, but for the word crisis in Chinese, there's 2 characters. And the first one means danger, and the second one means opportunity. So that's exactly what we're dealing with today, is the tipping points where we don't want to go over the edge, and the opportunities, identifying the opportunities. And I would add one more thing to what Osprey said is policy on the ground, and what is the pathway to implementation. There have been so many targets put out by so many people for 41 years, starting in Stockholm. And they keep getting added on to addendums, but really action on the ground and in policy, those pathways, how do you really get it done? And how do you get it done now? We're faced with scale and replicability. So I would add, as we're looking at our working groups and our agenda, that you think of those 2 things as well. I want to tell you just a little story that my background really is, and I wanted to ask a raise of hands, how many people here connected with nature as a child because of some experience, their mother, their father, their grandfather? How many really connected? Yeah, it's almost everyone. And this is the point that Jane Goodall made last night, is that the younger generation, that is a challenge for us. But my love of nature came from my mother, and also when I was very young, I married a rancher. And I came to this work actually through cattle ranching. And I had to work outside every day, and I observed biodiversity, and I observed conservation of precious water, and we had to work sustainably on our land to ensure our security, our economic security and our food security. And my ex-husband's grandfather was the first conservationist I ever met. He had 3 rules. He did not have a formal education, and this gets down into simplicity, that women around the world, people around the world can understand. So we don't get into too many of the parts per million and things that confuse folks. He had 3 rules. One is always leave half your grass. You don't know what the next year is going to bring. Number 2, be prepared to share your water with your neighbor, because someday you're going to be knocking on their door and asking them to share their water with you. And the third thing, which has to do with livestock specifically, he said never kill a predator unless it is absolutely the last resort. Put them into your bottom line. They were here first. So there are some basic rules that we have digressed from in how we're treating the earth and how we're treating each other. And I think that as we look at these agenda items, these action items, that Vandana last evening was talking about connection and narrative. And as we think about these action items that we're going to recommend, this is going to be published and go out to heads of state, members of parliament and Congress, CEOs of companies. This is something that is really going to be distributed widely so that we have influence, that we have clout, and we have critical mass in what we're recommending. She was talking about connection and the new narrative. So I would suggest, as you're thinking about this, is reflect on that narrative and how that feeds into the solutions that you're recommending. Because we've really got 3 tools that are coming out, or 2 tools that are coming out of this summit, and that is the agenda, the action agenda, and the declaration that you can take home and distribute. And the third thing, of course, is then the next piece of that is building the global women's climate action movement. So I have some thoughts that I want to share with you about as you're thinking about this agenda. We have global goals, but the implementation is on the local level, and local can mean communities, states, provinces, regional, and even national. And what we can offer, what women can offer, is on the ground. It's estimated, I learned just the other day, that 150 countries do not have the technical capacity to do a national climate plan, mitigation or adaptation, or a countrywide sustainability plan. So what's going to happen as this prevails, if this continues to prevail, is there are going to be thousands and thousands of local initiatives and projects that will accumulate into a plan. Now, the drivers of the shift that we want, that are now essential, range between economic structures and indices to transparent governance. Governance is really, really key. And peace is really key. You cannot have sustainability without either one of those. So we need to think about that. Examples of, key drivers that change the biosphere are really how we treat ecosystems and how we deal with the ocean. 2/3 of the planet, and I bring up oceans because it is included in one of our working groups, but often it is a stepchild of these kinds of sessions. So I'm hoping that, that we really do address that. And obviously, deep decarbonation is necessary. And beyond those targets, you know, we hear that 30% renewables by 2030. And the truth is, because the markets and the stock exchanges and the investors are not organized to fund sustainability. They just aren't. So we hear these numbers and we're going, oh, that's really great, but there is no plan, on-the-ground plan, for how you actually get there. So the actual number is 7 to 8%. But on the other side of that, 15%, there's 15% growth per year. So if we unlock the investments, which would be a pathway of how we get there, how do we unlock those investments? Risk management, there's some people in here, women in here who are really good business people and finance people that know more about this than I do. But I do know that that's one of the pieces. So when you're thinking about, you know, what's the price tag for your action item? What's the real implementation 1, 2, 3 to get it done on the ground? I think we should also, while you're working about synthesizing our priorities. And so how do we do that? Well, where are the #1 opportunities? Where would we get the most traction? How does it address one of the major tipping points that we do not want to go over? What has to happen in the short term, the midterm, and the long term? Okay, it's like the other day at a session I was in, somebody used a soccer game as an example. There's 90 minutes in a soccer game. You're in the 85th minute. You have 5 minutes left. You're losing. So what do? Do you try to run out there with a short-term strategy and try to win the game right there, or do you figure out how you can really get that last 5 minutes so that you have time to plan your strategy? So I would invite you to think about the short term, the midterm, and the long term actions. Do we have shared evidence? You know, all of you have different experiences, but I know you have shared evidence, whether it comes from nature or policy that isn't working or is working. We have shared evidence. I'm sorry, I have to use my computer here. The other thing I would ask about thinking about the new narrative in international negotiations, climate change is hardly mentioned, and I think climate change has to be embedded into sustainability solutions in that narrative. And Osprey touched on this, but intergenerational responsibility and the moral imperative is getting dropped out of, and this is what women bring to this, and we should never lose sight of this. It's being dropped out of the negotiations. The language isn't even there. The moral imperative isn't even there. I would invite us to be so strong on that piece, not just for humanity, but all future generations of all living things on this planet, upon which we depend. So I invite you, you know, the 7 generations forward that's much wisdom, and we need to share that. What are the breakthroughs? Think about the breakthroughs that you've seen in your countries or in your own work. And then I wanted to touch on this again, too, on categorizing. If you have 3 recommendations and there's policy, is that policy economic? Is that policy environment? Where does that policy fit in? Is that gender and empowerment? And then in your implementations, obviously, how you get there. And of course, integration, cross benefits. And I think that's something that when all the working groups give their reports, is we can see what those cross benefits are. And I'd like to see us put those cross benefits into a conclusion to our agenda. Because we're the connectors. You've heard connecting the dots, but we're connecting that health is related to climate change. We're connecting that the financial markets and the way they work now have perpetrated what's going on, and that needs to change. So we want to do that. And then the boundaries. There's global planetary boundaries. There's local boundaries. Ecosystem boundaries, carrying capacity. And again, scalability and replicability. That is so key now. So I think I've addressed just about everything. I wanted to share something with you which I think is overall positive. As I met with James Hansen yesterday, and we were talking about what our carbon budget is, and he said that he and Bill McKibben are going in the same direction. 130 gigatons is what we have left to emit on the planet if we want to stay at 1.5 degrees centigrade. So my question is, and I don't know if anybody in here knows the science behind that, but if we recommended that, how would we use that? If that's our budget, how would we use that budget of CO2? Would we use it to ramp up renewables? Would we use it for sustainable agriculture, repairing the soils? What would we use that for if that was our budget? And that can help us prioritize as well. So those are my thoughts that I wanted to share with you about how we might think, some of the things we might think about as we go through the working groups and come out with our recommendations. Thank you very much.